experience. And we will start. Does anyone have a preference on where we start? Professor Barter.
My name is Josh Barter. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And my clinical experience is mainly working in a psychiatric hospital. So working with patients both inpatient and who are hospitalized, also in the outpatient programs, doing more like group-based therapy. And right now, the last 5 years or so, I've been doing mainly clinical research.
And I'm Dr. Amy Vadney. I am the MFT Program Director here at the San Diego Regional Center. So welcome, everybody. My educational background, I double majored in college in psychology and public relations. And then I got my master's degree in marriage and family therapy from USD, my undergrad from Pepperdine, and then got my doctorate in clinical psychology, PsyD, from Alliant International University. And I am licensed both as a marriage and family therapist and as a clinical psychologist. And my clinical experience, I've been practicing here in San Diego for the better part of going on 20 years now, and in a variety of settings, from outpatient and inpatient hospitalization settings to nonprofit settings, and most recently in a private practice that I run. In addition to that, I manage the program here and get to train and teach a variety of students who are learning to become therapists. So thank you for being here tonight.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sam Gurgis, and I'm the Program Director of the PsyD program at Azusa Pacific University up in Azusa. We don't yet have a San Diego branch, but who knows, maybe someday. And so my degree is a PsyD. I'm a licensed psychologist, and my area of clinical focus has been child and adolescent trauma. So I worked at Children's Hospital Los Angeles for several years in an outpatient trauma clinic where we worked with, of course, kids who were involved with DCFS and child abuse of all different kinds. Worked with runaway homeless youth in Hollywood, worked with a number of just different populations impacted by trauma. And then I transitioned to APU about 10 years ago.
My name is Dr. Heather Hoshiko. I got my undergraduate degree at Point Loma Nazarene. Then I went to UNLV for Master's in Marriage and Family Therapy and did my doctorate at Southern California Seminary. So I have an MFT degree that's a master's, and I have my doctorate for clinical psychology. And I have worked dually locked inpatient psychiatric wards. I have worked private practice, community clinics, been in academia for quite some time. I've also worked with disordered eating as well.
And my name is Paul Bernard. I get my undergraduate degree in psychology from Azusa Pacific University way back in the day. I got my master's in clinical psych, also from Azusa. I always say 2 degrees and a wife from APU. Oh. So I'm very blessed. And also an LPCC, but my clinical work that I did at Azusa opened the door for me to pursue my clinical training at MFT. So many of my hours and my licensing process was down the MFT track, but took a little bit of a side turn and was able to do the LPCC, which we'll talk a lot about tonight. Experience in schools, working with kids in private practice with a reactive attachment disorder, foster care kids, kids with trauma issues. My doctorate, finishing up here in the next couple of months at Capella University in Advanced Studies in Human Behavior. I'm also a pastor, so it's nice to have that dual experience that helps me kind of go into both worlds, both clinical and ministry. So.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dr. Teresa Dodd-Gutierrez. I want to thank you for inviting me here. My background is a mixed bag, I guess you'd say. So I have a nursing degree, and I'll talk to you a little bit about opportunities in that tonight. But my PhD is actually in molecular toxicology and international health, but I work in public health in addition to the nursing program. And so my research interests, I've been in academia for about 20 years, and my research interests, in addition to doing what you would consider traditional bedside nursing, are also looking at exposures to the maternal fetal environment. Actually, it's an all toxicologist, but I'm really interested in fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and working with families with children from the autism spectrum disorders. So thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you so much. So a lot of people want to know where their professor's passion for the field came for. How did you end up in this field? So if you wouldn't mind sharing how you chose this degree maybe versus another degree, and what the similarities or differences were that maybe made it even hard to decide or easy to decide in your case, since each case is unique, but what in particular led to that track? And we can go down the line again.
So for me, I didn't choose social work. Social work was preordained to me. My mom is also an LCSW, and so I feel like I grew up in a social work family doing that. So I feel like that was kind of part of our family culture, is that type of work and that type of passion and what we discussed. So my dad was a Marine. My mom was a social worker, so I did the Marine Corps thing first, and then did the social work thing. So I checked both boxes. But yeah, I feel like I've always been drawn to social work because of the idea of really meeting the person in their environment and understanding how that environment contributes to what they might be experiencing. I like the clinical piece of it where we can do therapy, but I also like the other aspects that are more case management, where we can be a resource broker and really try and get the things in the environment to help align towards a path that helps them get to the goals that they want to achieve. So I feel like that's, I feel like it's such a diverse field that's also been kind of something that I contribute to it. But I had no other choice but to go into social work. I would have been disowned by my family.
Well, as I mentioned before, I did double major in psychology and public relations, and I had some great internships in public relations up in Los Angeles. It was really fun, kind of in the limelight, a lot of social planning and whatnot. But when I was trying to decide next steps my junior, senior year, I really was thinking hard about the impact I wanted to have in my life and on others. And just thinking, like, when I tried to look into the future, 60 years or whatnot, back at my life, I wanted to make a difference somehow, some way, even if it was just in one person's life. It would have been meaningful to me. So I decided that I was going to pursue psychology instead of public relations. I still like to plan a good party or two, but as my kids can attest to, one of whom is back there in the corner. But I will say that just kind of thinking through what I wanted to do, what would be most meaningful, what would make the most impact, was going into a helping profession. And so that's kind of what triggered it. In terms of what kind of led me into that, I first pursued the marriage and family therapy degree. And it was because my senior year, I took a family therapy course in undergraduate college. And it was just a fascinating look. I'd taken some other, obviously, undergraduate psychology courses, but something clicked for me with family psychology course. And it really just made sense, looking at things from a systemic perspective. And so for me, that kind of led me to choose the MFT route. After doing a double major and a master's, I was done for a couple of years. I was ready to work and go out and make some money, make a living. So initially, I hadn't thought about pursuing the doctoral degree, let alone a second license, but God kind of led me that path, opened up the door for that here in San Diego, which is where I was from. And that took me down looking at more of the individual perspective on health and on pathology. And so that was a very different perspective from marriage and family therapy, from the systemic piece. but equally very interesting. So that was kind of how that came to be. I always knew I wanted to do therapy, wanted to be a helper in some capacity. The part that really threw me for the loop was the teaching aspect. I'd never considered teaching and academia. So for me, that was very kind of on the side piece that I have come to find as equal to my therapy is my calling. And I just love teaching. It's one of my favorite things. I love the intimacy we have here at Azusa with being able to have small class sizes where there's meaningful interaction with the students. And just to see that spark ignite in my students that I used to have. So very meaningful work, and that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
So I should probably be honest, right? So if I'm honest, it may be a bit like Josh was really more my parents' decision than mine, but that's because my parents are immigrants from Egypt, and I was born here, I was born in LA, and for them, you get the highest level of education that you possibly can, and so there was no necessarily option to, once I got my undergrad degree, they said, great, it was here at UC San Diego, great, now what's next? And so, but I'm very grateful that, because what I knew at that point is I really wanted to go into the helping professions. I knew that I really was drawn to walking alongside people who were hurting. And so when I looked around, for me, the choice was between the PhD in clinical psychology and the PsyD. And as I learned about the PsyD and learned about it being a very practitioner-focused degree, a practitioner scholar degree, and I can talk more about that later, it was a perfect fit. It was exactly what I was looking for, something that would allow me to really go deep in an area and specialize, as well as to be able to do research and all of that still being very clinically focused. So that's why I chose the PsyD and have been grateful for it ever since.
Well, I guess if you're going to be honest, I should also be honest.
Okay.
I always say with my students when they say, how'd you get here? I don't know how I got here a lot of the time, because I originally moved from Colorado to be a dolphin trainer in the Navy for pinniped training, and I wanted to study shark behaviorism. And so for that, they wanted a degree in biology and a minor in psychology. And I had been struggling since the age of 11 with a shoulder that just didn't want to work. And after failed shoulder surgery the first time around, they said, you're never going to be able to do this. I'm sorry. And so I had just taken abnormal psychology and fell in love with it. I thought it was so cool. So I ended up flipping my major and my minor, had no plan to go to graduate school whatsoever. And a mentor of mine said, and we're going to address this later on, would you please apply to graduate school? I feel like it would be a waste if you did not. And you're supposed to apply to more graduate schools than I certainly did, which was the bare minimum of one. And got in, said I wasn't going to go. Ended up being talked into going, and had no desire to pursue a doctoral degree, and ended up doing that too. So again, I don't really know sometimes how I got here, but I'm the odd man out a lot of the time in that I do not love doing therapy, where most practitioners love seeing clients and patients. So academia was where I really, really loved. I started teaching when I was a graduate assistant at UNLV when I was very young, and now have the opportunity to teach graduate students and serve as undergraduate director for the San Diego and Murrieta locations for Azusa, and teach undergrad as well, and I absolutely love it. So that's how I got to be this profession.
Awesome. It's awesome. There's a theme definitely going on. I feel like I was kind of groomed for this. My parents were foster parents my whole growing up years. From the moment I came home to when I went to college, my parents were foster parents. So we had kids in and out of our home all the time. the worst of the worst and the best of the best. It was full spectrum. So I grew up in that chaotic environment where you get close to your foster siblings and they're taken from you. And so when I went to college, I was a first-generation college student. Went to college, declared undergrad psychology immediately, had to go to a Christian university, chose Azusa, had others in mind, walked on the campus, said this is the place. Ended up working on campus after my bachelor's degree, and because I was working on campus, I thought I might as well do my master's here. And clinical psych made sense, so I chose the clinical psych degree, was going down that MFT route, and pursuing an MFT license. And if you're anything like me, you struggle with exams. And I took that MFT exam 7 times and still didn't pass it. And then they passed this law where you have to pass the exam within 7 years of when you first register for it. It was 1 month from the deadline. So in some ways, the LPCC chose me.
Yeah.
I couldn't do the MFT, but all of it wasn't, I mean, God's plan and divine guidance was there. So in that whole period, I went back to school, got my PPS credential in school counseling, which I loved working with kids. I had no idea I could do schools from the clinical background. And I falsely thought, well, I've got a clinical background. I can go into schools and use that. It's very different, I found out when I started my credential. Got that done, and it was right around that time that LPCC was moving west to the California coast. And California became the 50th state to adopt the version of the LPCC. And I was so excited. Quickly jumped into that, was able to pass that LPCC license, and through it, also got a couple of added national certifications with that as well. And I haven't looked back. Being able to see the LPCC license begin to just really flourish in the state of California and kind of take on a life of its own, and also being able to incorporate it into school settings, it's like a dream come true. So it's been exciting.
Great story. So how I got here, meaning I guess by God's grace I'm here in total, but when I look at probably under the umbrella of public health, it really speaks to me, because you look at individuals and families, you look at communities, and you look at systems. And through my journey, career-wise, in nursing, looked at individuals and families. I looked at the whole package. But then also my career, I had the good fortune at one point of being a co-director of the Center for Health Equity at one of the CSUs. And you start really learning about integration. You know, our physical is related to our mental health, where you live. It really impacts outcomes. And so so to me, I'm here because I think that all of those things come together. My degrees, thankfully, have helped me to come together. And I really, to be an advocate for people who maybe don't have a voice all the time. So that's why it's really important to me to continue my work. And hopefully God's hand will be on it.
So one of the biggest questions that we get, maybe one of the most interesting, is what is the potential income in our field? People usually want to know, I mean, yes, we love our professions, we love our field, but will we be compensated for all the time and energy we put into it? So if you guys would not mind sharing what the potential income is for the field.
$1 million.
Sign me up, Josh.
Well, I think with social work specifically, it's interesting because it is such a diverse field that you could work for a nonprofit organization that is really living funding cycle, and the range might be lower. Where I have, my fellow students from my cohort work, are directors at Tesla or are city council members now in California, doing all kinds of different things with their degrees. So it really, I think the range is going to be pretty broad depending on where you focus and what type of social work you're practicing. I think on the back here of the social work they had from the, where was that from? That's the state
Bureau, yeah.
Bureau. I would say that's probably very conservative on the lower end, than what would be probably expected. But I think really the pay is not going to be standardized. It really depends on where you work and what you decide to. You can get licensed and do clinical work, or you can stay unlicensed with a terminal degree, and you could work in nonprofits or in other forms of advocacy. That would change what that profession. So that's a big non-answer. I have to answer directly.
Well, like Josh said, I think there's a lot of variability in our professions, which I like. I'm not a 9 to 5, same job every day. I wear a lot of hats, and for me, that keeps things really interesting between teaching and, academic stuff and advising and research and therapy. I find that that's really exciting, and it keeps me very interested in things. So I appreciate that flexibility. One thing that I really like about our field is as a woman, we can have children and fit our families around our therapy schedules or our teaching schedules, and you really can't put a price on that. When you're trying to be the best mom you can be the best therapist you can be the best teacher, professor you can be. So that flexibility piece, I think, is very appealing. I would say, depending on when you're coming out of the field, obviously, if you're not licensed, you're going to be making less than if you're licensed, than if you have, 20, 30 years of experience. Obviously, those will factor into the equation. But also having a specialty or a niche that you can market yourself on, whether that's trauma or couples therapy, couples counseling. If you can specialize in some kind of a niche where people will, want to come and find someone who's an expert in that, obviously that can drive up your income potential as well. But I would say for a typical licensed MFT, you're looking at anywhere between 100 and 150 private practice range per hour. And a little bit more for clinical psychology, probably somewhere in the range of 135 to 200 an hour if you're getting private pay. There's always insurance. I do not take insurance with my practice. I do something called out-of-network fee, and so my clients will pay me up front. I provide them with a receipt and an itemized bill that they can submit as out-of-network services with their insurance. It's then the insurance is incumbent on them to reimburse them individually rather than me having to do it and wait to be paid. So for me, my practice is small enough that works for me, and it seems to work for my clients as well. If I were to do therapy full time, I would probably have to open up the door to have insurance and to be able to take insurance because not everybody can afford $150, $175 an hour. So I think, and then there's always the sliding fee potential. If you have clients that come to you that are in need, of course, we're not going to turn them away, but they may not be able to pay your cash rate. And so we have what's called a sliding fee and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of variability in income, but also a lot of flexibility in terms of the things that you can do with your degree, whether it's working in schools or working in nonprofit settings or a little bit of both. So that's what I like about the profession.
Yeah. If you become a licensed psychologist, there is a lot that you can do, both in terms of clinically as well as out there. And so the answer you're probably going to hear from all of us is that it really varies. And so, yeah, there are lots of colleagues of mine who are in full-time private practice and, like Amy's saying, able to charge $200, $250 an hour for those sessions. The other thing that actually is a really big need in private practice, as clinical psychologists obviously, is the psychological evaluation, psychological assessment field. So whether it's kids who have learning differences and we're trying to figure out what's really going on, and the neuropsych testing that can be done there, whether it's someone after traumatic brain injury needing a full eval in order to figure out, you know, are they able to return to work, or are they not able? So psych evals are expensive. People, they're a lot of hard work. They take a long time to, you know, you do the testing, and then it's something that you've had a lot of training in. It's of the 3 years of practicum in the PsyD program at APU, 1 year is entirely an assessment clerkship. So 1 year is entirely getting trained under another licensed psychologist who does a primary role of assessment. And so, yeah, those assessments, people charge $3,000, $5,000 for. But beyond those clinical realms, I have a number of students who are opening up consulting practices, and this is really interesting. It's this idea of, can we bring what we know from clinical psychology? There are consultants who have no degrees, right? But then there are consultants who, you know, say, hey, I have a license in clinical psychology, and what I can bring to your organization is really an understanding of organizational dynamics, an understanding of, especially if there was something really toxic that happened, and so to be able to work as a consultant for companies can be very, very lucrative. Again, as a licensed psychologist with the doctor in front of your name, there are opportunities internationally as well, and so to work, and I can talk about some of the international options that we have, or opportunities we have as part of our program later, but you just can wear a bunch of different hats. That's true in other healthcare degrees as well, but with the licensed psychologist, there's a lot you can do.
So one of the most frequently asked questions when people are considering getting an undergraduate degree in psychology is, but what can I do with this? And the answer is honestly a lot. And I always like to use the instance of, not that there's anything wrong with this career, but if you get a job, if you go for your schooling to be a CPA, all you can do is taxes, usually. So there's just so much that psychology touches upon that employers look for, even if it's at an undergraduate level. And then if you do ever want to move up that level, then you'll be ahead of the game instead of coming in with maybe a different degree, trying to go to a master's program or doctoral program with something that's completely unrelated, where you're starting kind of square one. But it never, ever hurts to have a psych degree as a bachelor's. And in fact, a lot of companies are looking for that, in that you know how to communicate well with people. So it is very broad. I thought I was going to be the only one saying, well, the income is broad, but really for mine, I can't say, because it could be anything with an undergraduate degree.
Yeah. And for the LPCC, again, it's so similar to, when it comes to private practice, very similar to the MFT in what you could do with income-wise. But it depends on the demographic. It depends on if you do find a niche that you kind of want to specialize in, especially as an associate, a professional clinical counselor, you can begin to kind of ask yourself and go pursue opportunities where you can kind of narrow in. You know, as an associate, as your post-master's degree, you don't want to get too narrow too quick. It's good to get a broad experience and exposure to different type of clients you might want to work with, so that when you do get your license going to private practice, then you can find that niche, and you tend to then become like a specialist. You can be in your community and say, oh, you're maybe the only one doing play therapy, or one of the very few that are doing play therapy. Like in Temecula, Murrieta, we need more play therapists that are licensed. And so that you tend to be able to ask for a little bit more, or have a larger client load and something like that. But the other thing about LPCC that I have found, that I talk to students a lot about, is that we find that it becomes an option for, again, if you want to work in the schools, because the many master's degree programs now are geared towards a mental health focus. Master's degrees in school counseling. Obviously, if you go towards a school counseling route, you graduate with a credential, which you have to have a credential to work in schools. So if you're looking at something like working in schools, then, and obviously that's a niche that you're looking at, I want to work with students. It's not necessarily couples and family. That's MFT route exclusively. Now, MFTs can work in schools, LPCCs can work in schools, but the master's degree uniquely for the school counseling, the way it's designed for many schools here in Southern California especially, is it meets the educational requirements for the LPCC and many for the MFT as well. So you can then go on for the license, which means you're duly marketable. When you go for that job, for that school counseling position, because you want to work in schools, you are head and shoulders above those other candidates in that not only do you have the credential in school counseling, but you've got a clinical slant bent to it. And if you want to work in private practice in summers or in the evenings, you have that option as well. Again, you're duly marketable, both clinical and school counseling, which is wonderful, which again opens the opportunity for more income, more opportunities for increasing. Now, again, there's always demographics. School schedule is very fixed. You are there from 7 a.m., oftentimes to 3:30, then some and later. But schedules are great. If you have a family or raising a family, it's wonderful to have holidays off, summers off. It's a great schedule, and you can do private practice on the side as well. But the other great thing to know about the LPCC kind of history of where we're going financially and income, if you notice in California especially, I've seen a massive shift with regards to the way that mental health is being looked at with regards to schools. In the last 10 years, much it's like a microscope on the needs of students and their mental health needs. And so we're finding that a lot of schools all over California are specifically looking for school counselors who have a clinical background in their master's degree. It just increases opportunity. I know that Hemet Unified School District, Marietta School District, Temecula School District are hiring. Matter of fact, one of the positions I held for 4 years at Hemet Unified School District, I specifically was a mental health specialist working as a school counselor, and I was hired specifically for that. And the entire school district, every single high school has a specific licensed professional who holds a license, but it also is a school counseling credential. So that, and we're seeing that more and more as we.
Can I add something, Paul?
Yeah.
So the thing also about the school counselor, from my perspective as a child psychologist, is you're the front line.
That's right.
You're the ones who are there in the trenches, and kids who, for any number of reasons, may never get to a psychologist are being seen by the school counselor in the school and getting the help that they need. And then if there's a need to refer on to something specializing kind of with a psychologist or with assessment or something like that, there's opportunities to do that. But I mean, that really comes from, in my days at CHLA, it was the mental health folks who are full-time at the school who would make referrals to us if there was something more significant or this, that, or the other. But
that's right. Of anybody else in the school, it's probably that school counselor that does the most referrals that are targeted to outside resources. Yep.
So I did kind of echo the other panelists that it's very variable. Either when you have a nursing degree, which is there's multiple different types of nursing degrees, there's different specialties. The same thing with public health. Even undergraduate degrees in nursing, if you want to go into psychiatric nursing, there's specialty certifications for that. And with each certification, that changes your pay scale in most places. I think nursing and public health are great launching degrees, the way we're talking about, here with the panel, that you can choose a lot of different ways. You can be entrepreneurial, you can go on to graduate school, you can work out in the community. I think, I don't know if I could say this, just it's usually the pay is what the market will bear, just really like a lot of other specialties, because the same as with academia. If you go into it and you're in an area like California, a lot of the private universities are going to want to, they know their competition is going to be a CSU or a UC. They don't want to be too far off so that they can still attract that. And I think what all the panelists were saying too is you have to look at, in addition to making a living, which we're all doing, that idea of what's important to you, your lifestyle, your schedule. You want time with your family. That's value added in addition to benefits. And, you know, so I think that how much you make is also not just money, it's the lifestyle, and all of us get to do the wonderful work of helping people, and that's worth an awful lot. So it's very,
yeah, I think the thing that was cool that I looked when I was looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics is that all of our professions are projected to have a phenomenal increase in need, way more than average. It was anywhere from 12%, I believe, to 22%, which is far above any other profession, really. So mental health is something that is in high demand and is going to continue to only increase in demand right now as the population ages, especially. For those of you who are like, wow, you skirted around the question a lot, it's because it is broad, but the numbers would suggest, and this is very broad, so I can't give you firmly, this is the answer, but anywhere for pretty much all professions, anywhere between 40,000 to 150,000.
Per year.
Yep, per year. So.
I forgot to add something, Heather. If you're interested in what psychologists make, APA, American Psychological Association, every couple years publishes a workforce analysis. So all you have to do is go to apa.org and search up workforce analysis, and it'll tell you what a forensic psychologist makes. It'll tell you what a hospital-based psychologist makes, what a military psychologist makes, et cetera. And so there you could get some real, some more exact numbers around that for psychology.
Yeah.
And it'll vary too, depending on what part of the country
Yeah, that's right.
and state
Yeah,
you live in.
that's right. And how many years you've been licensed. And
Certainly, yeah. So that's why we say broad, because it's broad. A lot of people want to know too, can you work while you're in school? Because a lot of people do have families, jobs, we need to make a living. So in your experience or in your program, are you able to work part-time, full-time while being a student?
So I'm not sure. I think that in social work, my experience was that it would be near impossible because it's 2 internships, so both years have an internship. So if you're going to school full-time and doing your internship, that'd be really a lot to juggle and work full-time. But I know some people who have superhero abilities and did work. I did not work, so I tried mainly just focusing on school and doing my internships during that time. So I think it depends. A lot of the programs might, have specialty components to it where they try and make it flexible. But I think of it as, from this perspective, you're spending a lot of money to go to school. You're really investing time, effort into your education. So if it's possible, obviously it's not always possible, you have to work and have some income, but if it's possible to cut back and really focus on education while you have this short amount of time to do it, that's probably the best strategy, is to really invest in your internship, really invest in your education, and then work a few extra hours once you graduate.
Yeah, I think it depends on the school as well, because in my master's program, right up the hill at USD, they only offered a 2-year program. And so my second year, my practicum year, they require you to do a 40-hour week to get 500 practicum hours in order to graduate. That leaves little room for working, because you're working, as I said, a 40-hour week just getting your clinical hours. One nice thing about our program is we only require half that, 225 hours. And so that allows our students to have some flexibility in terms of the number of hours they work in their practicum settings, as well as we offer different tracks of our program. So we don't just pigeonhole you into one 2-year program. We offer a 2, 3, and 4-year program. So we realize that some people absolutely cannot do a program in 2 years. It's just not feasible because of the fact that they do have to work, or they do have families, or they have parents that they're taking care of that are getting older. So for whatever reason, we are able to provide that flexibility for you. That also allows some flexibility in the clinical practicum schedule, if you will, which can vary from 8 to 12 hours per week to up to 25 hours per week. So that does allow for some wiggle room to be able to have a part or full-time job as well.
Yep, so the PsyD program at APU is 5 years, so that's 4 years of full-time coursework, a final year of a full-time internship, and this is like a medical residency. It's a match process where you interview at a bunch of places, you rank order, the sites rank order, and then there's some computer algorithm somewhere that says you matched in South Dakota. Or, I mean, you can only match at places you interviewed at, but it is a full-time program. I do have students, obviously, who have to work, and so students work 15 hours, maybe 20 hours. I mean, those are the students who are really excellent at time management, on top of their coursework, on top of their dissertation, on top of their practicum hours, and practicum hours starting in the second year. So you have, like I said, 5-year program. The last year is the internship. The first year is all coursework, foundational skill stuff, and then you're doing 3 years of clinical training, 3 years of practicum. When you're at a practicum site, whether it's a hospital or a VA or a community mental health center or wherever, you're there about 15 to 20 hours a week doing clinical practicum. Then you're in classes. So folks who have to work do work, and God bless them. It's incredible to see them hustle. If they don't have to work, like Josh was saying, it really is sort of an opportunity for them to really invest in their future.
Also, it prevents burnout.
Yeah.
And I think one factor that a lot of people don't think about is the emotional kind of toll, if you will, a beginning therapist is facing. You're learning all these things, you're being exposed to all kinds of people, and if you're not able to charge yourself at the end of the day, you're doing your clients a major disservice. So you have to factor in that work-life balance and that self-care piece, especially as beginning therapists in training. So I always like to remind people to schedule it in if you have to in your calendar, but you need to be able to find time to do those things as well.
So absolutely feasible to have a job and work while you're taking classes as an undergraduate. Here at the regional campus, we really focus in on that, of having a lot of people coming from community colleges, some coming from four-year universities where they've already started their schooling and come in with credits already to join our program to finish up. Maybe they don't want an associate's, they want to go farther and have a bachelor's degree. So we hold classes from 6 to 10 at night here to make that something that is very feasible, to make sure that we're offering things that fit well in people's schedules so that they are able to finish their education. Other schools, you can be a full-time student, get through it quickly. But you know, for a bachelor's degree, we're talking usually around 4 years is the very typical, that's what it is. And I'm gonna just throw out too that for some programs, when we're getting up into master's and doctoral level, a good way to mitigate or kind of like work the system of if you do have to do clinical hours, or you do need to go to school full-time, is to try and get a graduate assistantship or a teacher's assistantship where you are getting paid, or you're getting some kind of tuition discount if that's available, so that you're not only getting paid on top of going to school, but it looks really good on a resume or a curriculum vitae to be like, I also worked for the school in this capacity where you're almost getting paid to go to school. So I would highly recommend that, especially, you know, for those of you who are looking into doctoral programs, master's programs, that you see if that school does offer that. Maybe it's not the make it or break it, but it's a way to certainly get some money while you are in your program.
I forget this, Heather, simply that so in the doctoral program, you get a master's, you can't do anything with it. It's not a licensable master's, but you get a master's after your second year in the program. What you can do with it actually is get a job. And so I forget that after I got my master's, while I was still in the PsyD program, I actually began adjunct teaching at APU. So in the undergrad psych department at APU. And any job like that really helps. It's in the field, so you're also doing what you're loving and studying and all that.
And I'll follow up on that as well, especially for your master's degree, whether it's school counseling, clinical. If you have to work or need to work in any way, when it's in the field that is paying you a wage that you can live off of, but also you can use it in your clinical training, your classroom kind of real life application, academics you're learning in the classroom, you can apply it in your work setting as well. It's only going to enhance your experience and round you out that much more, which is great. We have a lot of master's students, even our undergrad students, the professional program in Marietta, that are currently working in schools, but their hope is then to get that master's degree and the LPCC license and go back to the schools. And so they already have been. Maybe they work in the classroom or like an aide or something, or work during recess during the day, or in some sense. But they're in the field already. Now, having said that, is it ideal to work if there's any way possible? Of course, if you could focus on your academics, and just carve out that time to focus on that. But there is something to be said about being able to take that work life and be able to bring those two together. But all of that is dependent on what your support network is like at home. This is not a single journey. It's a difficult journey to do this alone, even by yourself, without a job. Ideally, being able to focus on just academics, you have to have a close support network, because the psychology field, whichever realm it is such a taxing, potentially draining field to learn early on to kind of build around your support network is crucial to your success. So start that in your academics. As you go into the field, you're going to need that self-care kind of mode. This 2020 is my first year that I'm looking at finally not being a student of something. And let me tell you, my wife of all people is the most excited. Yeah. So she's been my biggest cheerleader. My kids, for the most part, didn't even know that I went through coursework for a master's degree and a doctorate, because much of my work was when they're in bed at night. But I'm a late guy. I'm a late night person, so it worked for me. So.
When I think about whether or not you can work as a student, there's a couple of different ways to approach it. If you have to work, you have to work. I have worked. I always needed a job, be a waitress or babysitting or whatever I needed to do that, and it worked. It's a sort of sleepless endeavor, right, when you have to work. But looking at the students we have now, we have a few different programs. So if you look at the nursing program, so let's say that some of you have an undergraduate degree in psychology. There's a pathway that some people want to go into what's called an ELM program. That's an entry-level master's. So you would take your undergraduate degree. That's a very intensive program, and most of the students do not work with that. You have 18 months to finish up your licensure in nursing and to get your master's degree. So pretty much those would be the students I would say don't work. I didn't go that route. But other than that, you have an RN to BSN program, and so they're already licensed, and so basically they are working, and you have programs that work around that. You have nurse practitioner programs that are master's degrees and other types of master's degrees, and most of those students are working. I can't think of one of our public health students, which is given through Monrovia, that is not working. And then you have jobs of life too. You want to be available to your family, and so like everybody's saying, you have to consider that balance between we have to survive and pay your bills, and, but you also need to have enough time for yourself. And I think that being really resourceful is really good. So if you have something, a job that, as the panelists spoke, that you can integrate into studies, getting clinical hours. I know we have students in the public health and doctoral programs that do a fellowship that gives them a stipend, but they're also getting their clinical hours for it. They get some credit, they can integrate coursework. Those are the types of things that I think, and certainly faculty at APU are very interested, have good relationships with students, and they want to help them, guide them in those kinds of things in any way they can. So, like I said, it depends on the program.
So one thing that people always want to know too, and again, we could say that this is a broad range of however long you want to take it, but let's say that on average, how long does it take from start to finish your particular degree? If you're, let's say, a full-time student.
For the MSW, I think it's a caveat here. So if you have a BSW, you have a bachelor's degree in social work, and programs have advanced standing where it does shorten the amount of time that the MSW can be completed in, I think by half a year. But I would say traditionally, if it's minimum of 2 years for the MSW, and then some programs can go 2 to 4 years if it's a part-time.
And and then if we include a bachelor's degree, we're looking at around anywhere from 6 to.
It took me 8 years to do my bachelor's degree because I was in the Marine Corps. So I think 4 years plus the 2 years would be the fastest. Would be 6 years.
I would say if you do an undergrad in 4 years, I mean, the quickest you could get your master's would be 2. But remember, you can do some things with a master's, but you need the license. So you want to then factor in getting your 3,000 hours, some of which will count in the program. But if you're doing that full time, you're looking at a minimum of 2 years. So you want to factor that into the equation of not just having your master's, but also being licensed. I was one of the rare exceptions that did my doctorate very quickly. It was partly in terms of how many courses they waived of my master's degree, and part of it was that my program folded and I got unemployment for 6 months, and so I was able to only focus on my dissertation. That helped immensely, and also picking a dissertation committee that was willing to work quickly. Some of them, as you know, probably can be slow.
Are you talking about me?
No,
Yes, you are talking about
but in general, some people are slower than others. And so that impacted some of my cohort versus myself. So I think being strategic as well in picking a committee, not only that's interested in your area of study, but also in your pace.
Yeah. Amy, I'll jump on that one because it's something similar, is that all of my career path and my academic path that brought me to what I thought I wanted to do career-wise, the only regret that I have, and I'm not the kind of person I don't have many regrets at all, but the only regret I have is that I knew I was doing clinical, and I knew I was going to do something, I was going to stay in that because I love the field. I realized I did not go into my doctorate right out of my undergrad. That I would have pursued, I should have pursued it earlier because I knew that was the pathway I knew. If you know your clinical, consider there's doctorate programs that have that embedded master's degree because you're already in that frame of mind already. And my life was ordered around academics and studying already. I didn't have a plan to shift outside of it at any point. So that would probably be my only, I should have really considered that, especially having kids and growing up and the work responsibilities. It really would have been great to have that done early on.
And that's one of the biggest misnomers of the doctoral program not just PsyD programs, PhD programs also take students straight out of undergrad. And so you do not necessarily need a master's. If you choose to, if you have a master's and then go on to get your degree because you felt like, oh yeah, I love this so much and I want this even more, then that's great. The majority of students in the PsyD program at APU come straight out of undergrad. And so they have a bachelor's in psychology and neuroscience and this, that, or the other, and come straight into the program. So then when they're in the program, it is a 5-year program for most every student. Some students take an additional year because life happens and, you know, they have to take a little bit more time, that's fine. So remember that last year is that full-time internship. I keep bringing that up because it doesn't feel like school anymore. I remember doing my internship and loving it. I wasn't done with my dissertation because I'm a bit of a slacker, but it was so fun to not be in courses anymore, you know, done 4 years of coursework, and then just to be full-time in the field. So once you complete that and get your degree, it's about another year. This is something that's a little different from the MFT. So the MFT has those 3,000 hours. Once you have your doctorate in clinical psychology, it's about a year afterwards until you are eligible for licensure. It varies state to state, but for the most part, you can get licensed after 6 years. So 5 years of the program and 1 year of what's called a postdoctoral fellowship of some sort.
So in total, we're looking at around
4 years or however long in undergrad, 6 years until you're a licensed psychologist. 6 to, I mean, say 6 to 8.
Yeah. All right. So we're looking at 10 to
12 years, yeah.
I'll tell you, I did a kind of a different path in that I did the MFT first, worked, did the 3,000 hours, and got my license. So then I cut back from working full-time and worked part-time as I went on and got my doctorals, completed my doctoral work. So the whole time I was in my doctorate program, I was getting paid as a licensed MFT, which again, it allowed me to be able to only have to work 3 days a week as opposed to 5 days a week. So that was
and
one
get paid
option.
as an LMFT, not as a barista at Starbucks.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so that
Nothing wrong with
helped.
working as a barista, but you get paid a little bit more as an LMFT.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was kind of the path that I took because I didn't go straight into the doctoral program.
Yeah, I fast tracked my doctoral program. I went straight through school, didn't take any breaks, just went straight through and got it done in 10 and a half years. But the thing that holds most people up at the doctoral level is going to be your dissertation. And so, you know, I would highly recommend, you know, working with your committee well and getting their advice on how to do that quickly if you want to do it quickly. Yeah. But that's definitely something that can be a challenge during that time. But it's definitely, I mean, I'm a testament that you can do it in 10 and a half years and get everything done from undergrad to actually getting your doctorate. Again, I said for bachelor's, it's usually around 4 years. And so, yeah, I mean, you could do it quicker if you come in with AP classes from high school. It depends on how many classes you want to take per semester or term based on the university. We go by term here, and most people, which is 8 weeks, and most people will take 2 classes during that 8 weeks. So per semester, that would be 4 classes if you're on a semester system or you're used to doing that.
And LBCC is very similar to MFT, very similar. 4 years undergrad, 3 years master's degree, but then you've got all your internship hours, 3,000 hours, no less than 2 years, and then your licensure. And then if life happens and busy stuff, it changes for everybody. But you can blitz through it, you can, absolutely, but life happens. Factor that in.
Yeah, so I think for the MPH program, we have a pretty prescribed pathway right now. It's going full-time is 2.5 years, but you do have a capstone to do with that. And so you can go with, let's say, an undergraduate psychology degree into the MPH. In terms of the nursing, however, that's a little different. If you have an undergraduate psychology, you have to, to go into nursing, you have to pursue that license. Even if it's something like the ELM program that you already have an undergraduate and you're going to it, it's still, you have to get that license within a program in that 18 months. Now, for some people, you can say, well, I have my bachelor's degree in psychology, I just want the nursing license. You can actually go to a community college, with your bachelor's degree and just get the licensure, and then you can, for some master's programs, pursue a master's in nursing. In the doctoral programs, which is primarily where I'm teaching, there's a PhD in nursing, and you have a limit. I'm going to say you have a limit of 7 years. And the reason why I say that, it doesn't mean it takes everybody 7 years. It can be 4 or 5. But as the panelists were saying, when you have research, there's things sometimes out of your control, your committee. You have to really have a good relationship with the chair of your committee, as we know, because they hold the permission as to whether or not your writings and your research go through. We also have a practice doctorate that's a relatively new degree. It's a doctor of nursing practice. That's for practicing RNs, many of whom have nurse practitioner degrees, not all of them. And what's coming ahead in the future is that nurse practitioners are going to be required to be DNPs. So if they come with, I think, 500 hours worth of clinical hours, that's then applied to their clinical requirements. In addition, they have what's considered a doctoral scholarly project. So they can go full-time, and that was 2.5 years, but it's hard to cobble it all together because they have to have all of these other pieces in place, many of whom, like I said, are either a nurse practitioner or have a master's degree already. They have to do 1,000 hours in their doctor of nursing program, which is a lot of clinical hours in addition to a scholarly project. So there's a lot of years and a lot of flexibility with that.
So let's take this next question, just jump in, because it'll kind of, I think, overlap for a lot of the different ones. But what are schools looking for in a candidate? If you want to be ahead of the game and really be a qualified candidate that is considered, what should you be doing before that process to look good? And anyone can jump in.
I think it does help. I remember reading those applications, and those personal letters really do matter a lot, those essays, because it's a kind of a picture into who you are. Because again, you're looking at many different applicants for that master's degree, and anytime you've got an applicant who can speak well to their either their personal or their professional life, where they've worked in a place that is similar to what they want to go into, again, that helps a lot when you're looking. It doesn't mean that's required, that you've been working in the field that you're going to get a master's degree in. Doesn't mean that. But when you can articulate well and be able to share from the heart how you see yourself in that field, it matters a lot for those that are looking at those applications. I think that's one thing that for all the different applicants we've looked at, that stood out the most.
Yeah.
That letter matters a lot.
For undergraduate, you're typically not well versed in APA, which is a style of writing, but I'm sometimes surprised at that people don't take the time to reread and edit what they've written when, so you definitely should be going over that entry letter or that entry essay to make sure that everything looks good grammatically, have somebody else check it out, take that type of approach. But writing skills are really big when I'm looking at applicants. And if they can write in an APA format, which is, like I said, a type of style that we use that is unique to our profession, even better. I'm blown away when people have good APA skills.
And that's especially true for a master's applicant.
And doctorate, absolutely.
And make sure if you're using the university name, that the name of the university. I've had this twice where somebody's like, and that's why I'm interested in applying to, and it was a different university. Again, silly, but it's really important, like you said, to read your work and to have somebody else read it, because you could read it 5 times and still miss things. So have like a friend or a family member also read through it to make sure.
Another thing we love to see is volunteer work. If you are passionate about being a change maker in your community and you're willing to do that without the recognition or the pay, we like to see that you are passionate enough to go out there and do that. So volunteer experience, being a member in some type of club, whether you're coming from high school, your master's, your doctor, whatever it may be, we like to see that as well.
Yeah, whether it's in your church or big brother, big sister, if you're a camp counselor, certainly highlighting anything that you have experience in is very beneficial. It could be that you just were a mom for 20 years and now you're finally able to do something for you. There's a lot of experience in that. So don't hesitate to add any of those things. And certainly any experiences you had as a TA, if you had those, are also helpful.
What about GRE?
So I'll jump in. I mean, we do have, so the PsyD program every year, we're in the thick of it right now, gets 50 applications, and we have cohorts of 25. And we only did one a year, so it is a competitive process, but maybe similar to how Paul was saying, it's about goodness of fit. So of course, a good GPA matters. Yes, you have to take the general GRE, not the psych GRE, but the general GRE for our program, only because that shows sort of academic aptitude. We actually don't have on the website a minimum GRE requirement because it's only one of the aspects of your application that we look at. And so this idea of goodness of fit is one that is really important to us. Have they looked at our website? Like Amy's saying, do they actually know, our program has 3 distinctives. Systems thinking, because first was the MFT at APU and then the PsyD. So we have continued to have a systems focus in our PsyD program, integration of faith and spirituality into clinical practice, and diversity and social justice. These are the 3 things that define the APU PsyD program, and it's in everything that we do. And so if someone in their essays are talking about, yeah, I noticed that, Dr. So-and-so teaches a class on historical systems of oppression and how that affects mental health inequality, I'm very interested in that. That says a lot. So do look over websites, do read descriptions of faculty members. Don't just BS it. Actually, identify what is it about that program that would be really interesting to you, and then kind of articulate that in your letter.
Yeah, picking out a faculty member that specializes in an area that you are very interested in looks great too. So going and taking the time to do that. And for those of you who don't know what the GRE is, let's think of it as the ACT or SAT for graduate studies. There is a general one as well as one that is psych-based. And depending on which school it is, they'll have different requirements if they want it or not, if they want a certain score on it. So it depends.
Yeah.
For the record, MFT does not require a GRE for entrance. So that is one for a lot of applicants that they don't have to do that.
School council does not require the GRE either.
So nursing, we don't have a requirement for the GRE, but I can tell you for both nursing and public health, it's unfortunate, but GPA counts very highly. Not that that's the only thing that defines a person, but when you have far more applicants than you have spots, you want to try to be as fair as you can.
Yep.
So you look at GPA, but that's certainly not the only thing. But that does cut people off, right? So if you had, 50 people, you can say, okay, we're going to look at least the cutoff is GPA. That doesn't mean that's the only thing they'll accept. We do look at, do you publish, do you volunteer, do you have, good letters of recommendation, and only ask people that you know are going to give you a really good letter, because we can read between the lines.
Yeah.
There's really hesitancy, and sometimes when people are writing letters that I think, and I can tell you as a faculty member, I get a lot of requests. If I can't write a really good letter, I will tell the person, maybe you should go to so-and-so who might know you a little better, or that kind of thing. But that weighs very heavily, even if you have a great GPA.
And if I may to that, if you're getting a non-academic letter of recommendation from a pastor, they may not necessarily fully know so they may be writing, well, they could really be a little bit better at this, that, or the other. Honestly, to us, that means, ooh, if they're saying this must be a huge red flag.
Right.
So if you're asking someone to write a letter of recommendation for you, hopefully they have experience writing a letter of recommendation. There are samples that are online that just help a writer kind of know in academia and the professional world what a good letter of recommendation is like.
Yeah, I would also say if you have a professor who is looking for people to help with research, hop on board the research train, because that is definitely what got me into graduate school, was that I was able to say, I've conducted research before, I've written for academic journals before, I'm published, and that by far was like, oh, that separates you from a lot of other people. So even if you don't love it, there might be a niche in there that you do like data analysis, or just going through fine-tooth combing with APA style to make sure everything looks good. But being even, author in any way, that looks fantastic for graduate schools. Absolutely fantastic.
And I just want to say, not everybody has the stellar highest GPA ever. And I still would encourage you to apply, because I will tell you, over the course of almost 12 years of doing this, I've had some students that we've admitted on a provisional or conditional basis, and they didn't have the greatest of GPAs, but they had things in their application that really spoke to who they were as a person, of their character, what their desires were, why they were pursuing this field. And some of them have come out being some of the best students we've ever had. So I think one of the unique things about a small private Christian university is we don't get thousands and thousands and thousands of applications like a huge college or public university will, that simply, if you don't make that cutoff, they don't even see. We take the time, we read through everything. So one of the things that I love about the essays is just hearing your story. Why are you wanting to do this? Why are you passionate about it? And let me tell you, some of the stories I've read through those personal essays have been extremely private and sharing. People that have been molested as children that now want to help children that are being, in therapy. And that's why they've chosen to pursue this. Very, very passionate and personal letters, but strong desires to help people in the community that are facing challenges that maybe they faced as a kid growing up in a divorced family or whatnot. So, I encourage you to the best of your ability to bear that, but also to connect it to why it is, what about that experience has made you or led you to want to do this profession and help others.
I would just say for social work, the mother of social work didn't have an MSW. So Jane Addams, who we look to as being the mother of the field, didn't have a degree in social work, right? She just did the work. So I think if that's an area that you are interested in pursuing, is look around your community, look around your life, and look at how you can do the work. And so it is a degree of service. And I think when you apply that, or as early as you can into your life, then it becomes a part of who you are, and it looks, again, as it said, looks great on an application.
Yeah, let's popcorn the next question too, of what, if you get past the essay portion and get invited for an interview, what should people expect during an interview process, which is kind of like the next step before you're either accepted or it's a decline?
Well, we do a group interview for our program. Part of it is by choice. We like to see the interaction of applicants because so much of what we do in our program is group-based. So we like to watch the interplay between the different students. We also have a writing sample. That way we're learning more about you, but we're also seeing how you do on the fly with writing. And that, you know, did you really write your application essay or did somebody else write it for you, right? So we will do that, and we will ask both kind of background questions, but also experiential questions about like how might you or what might you do in these kind of scenarios. But it's all group-based for the most part interviews.
All I would say again, it's about goodness of fit. We have these interview days where we invite 15 candidates at a time, and faculty, you do individual interviews. Don't just say what you think they want you to say. That unfortunately shows, especially when you're working with a bunch of psychologists or PT or mental health professionals. It shows, and so think about it, be authentic, be genuine, and that goes so far.
Yeah, one that I think when I tell people about is unique because there usually is for sure an individual interview with a candidate. Sometimes there is a group interview. Unique, I guess, somewhat in my master's program at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, was a role play where we had the capacity of a clinic where the professors could sit behind the glass and watch while graduate students that were already in the program were actually doing a scenario, and you were supposed to act as therapist. So that may be something that's a little unique that I don't know if anyone else had to go through, but I sure did, and was glad that I brushed up on some interventions before I went to the interview. But that was a unique portion that I've had as well.
Yeah, I would just simply add, it almost seems silly to even say it, but it's important, is be respectful. Not only how you present yourself,
Right,
what you wear, but nervousness can come across unintentionally in ways that seem offensive to those that are interviewing you, but just be aware of how you present. Nervousness can really change into something that you didn't intend. So practice role play in those interviews, dress nicely, but be respectful, be thankful, appreciative, be courteous, be on time, for goodness sake, because it all matters. Because you're interviewing with a bunch of psychologists, that's right.
Yeah.
It all matters.
So I can speak about, I was on the admissions committee for the Doctor of Nursing Practice, and one thing we actually did for the students is we, after they met what we felt like were fair evaluation before they ever got to the point of the interview, we actually sent them questions and said, think about this. One of the questions really was that, did they understand what the degree was? Did they understand what they were expected to do? Had they thought about time management? Again, because I said we had a lot of full-time employment and or some sort of employment. And so if that right there is, if you already give someone questions and you have time, they have to fill that out in time to think about it. We're hoping they'll come to us with questions, because that means they thought a lot about that, and that, like you said, they looked it up on the website. What kind of courses do you offer? That we have the faculty up on websites, including what their research interests are, and that they were able to speak about that. So we give them time to prepare, and we want to see students, really take advantage of that time. So that's a big deal.
So I guess we'll go down the line on this one. Is there a thesis or dissertation?
I'm actually not sure for the MSW program. I apologize here, Patty.
In lieu, hi, I'm Evelyn Castor-Guillen. I'm the MSW Director for the Inland Empire. We're just launching a 3-year part-time program this fall at our San Bernardino site. We do not require a thesis. We have what's called the Capstone Leadership Project. And so that's what we require. And we also don't require the GRE.
We do not have a thesis or dissertation. We have what's called a comprehensive exam, and it's done in 2 parts. We've done it very intentionally to mimic the actual MFT licensing exam process. So our first one is law and ethics. It's looking at all the legal and ethical issues in our profession, as well as how to assess and manage for those. And then our second comp exam is what's called a clinical comp, and we take more of a vignette-based approach and then ask questions that may be theoretically based, interventions, conceptualization questions, and kind of fine-tune it based on some of those vignette questions. Again, very much paralleled to the actual exam. And we find that our students come out of the program very prepared. We've got it narrowed down to actually the number of questions that they focus on this issue. So we've paralleled it very closely to the actual exam. It's taken online, just like the actual exam. So we find that our students come out very prepared as a result of that kind of intensive process at the end of their studies.
So yeah, in the PsyD there is a dissertation. It's part of getting a doctorate, part of the hazing that happens to call yourself a doctor. We do have dissertations, of course, that are empirical, so quantitative or qualitative, either using research. I was on sabbatical a couple years ago, went to Lebanon, interviewed aid workers who are working with Syrian refugees. I now have students who are using some of those interview questions for their dissertation. So it could be something like that. Dr. Lauren Martin is one of our faculty, has a mouse lab on campus. Lots of students are looking at stuff with DNA with him. I don't know what they do, but so those are quantitative, qualitative dissertations. But because we are a PsyD program, we do have what we call a clinical application, and this is what I'd like to highlight because this is just a lot of fun. You end up becoming an expert, gaining expertise in an area of research, and then you develop a product of some sort, something for that population. And then all you do is you get feedback on that product, and that is your dissertation process. So I'll give an example. There's a student of mine who was just a rock star. She's actually now a licensed psychologist, one of the clinical supervisors at a community mental health center in Long Beach called the Guidance Center. And so Christina Zaval's dissertation was a training for other mental health professionals who are working with kids whose parents are undocumented. So helping therapists understand documentation stress and the impact that that can have on the family, on the individual. She jumped into the literature. She learned everything that she could that had been done in terms of research with this population. And then she developed the 2-hour workshop. And then she took that workshop, got feedback on it. So that was her whole dissertation process. And that's now her intellectual property. So she now does that seminar around, and so these clinical applications, people have done workbooks. Someone made a self-help book that actually got picked up by APA and has been published by them. So things like this are something that you can do. Again, it's getting expertise in that area of the literature, of the research, and then creating a clinical product with it.
So no, there's no thesis or dissertation for undergrad. However, we do have a field experience class, which I'll talk about a little later, and do you have to collect clinical hours? When can you? But I will make sure that everyone, I sit down with each individual student when they do a paper that is a literature review that's focused on a topic that is very interesting to them, and I fine-tooth comb it like I would if I am editing journal articles for peer-reviewed literature, and sit down with each person and say, this is how to improve your writing, and this is the different components of APA in case they do want to go on to graduate school or to be published.
Yeah, I know the master's degree program obviously does not require a dissertation. Many master's degree program could require a comprehensive exam at the end. It's common, very, very common. But that's the majority of it. And I like what you said, even in a master's program, that writing piece is so crucial. Becoming better at writing is such an important quality. If you leave your master's program, your bachelor's program, then your master's, being a better writer, better communicator, you're going to succeed so much more in the field, so much more.
I just got asked on Tuesday when I taught, Dr. Badney, why do we need to take this APA seminar? Why do we have to take a research methodology class? We're not going to really go out and do research. And I said, because we want to at least give you the know-how to read research and to be well-versed as you leave. Whether or not you choose to become a professional writer or write in a peer-reviewed journal or whatnot, whether or not you end up in a doctoral program, we want to train you to the best of our ability to know how to read research, interpret the statistical data, and be able to write well. That will serve you well in life.
So for the MPH program, a dissertation is not required. For the Doctor of Nursing Practice, it is considered a clinical scholar, a clinical doctorate, so it is evidence-based practice by and large that you is similar to what you're talking about with PsyD, where you have a clinical application to a piece of it, and the PhD is, of course, does have a dissertation. I wanted to just echo about research, and as you get more into your practice, something that I feel is really important to remember is reimbursements, and I was just thinking about this the other day, and a lot of what's in research and evidence actually becomes what drives your practice, that what's considered the standard of care. So at any level that you are, if you participate and understand how to do research, that actually does have a link to practice, because we all know evidence-based practice is sort of the buzzword about what you do and what's considered meeting the standard, but it also directs what you do as long as it's published. So being able to not only understand and critique the literature, but also to be able to answer a research question and even carry out small research studies. And of course, asking lots of different types of clients to participate, because a lot of people from sort of marginalized groups can be left out of participating in research, and then we're applying that to them. That's so that's something that no matter what stage you're at, really learning about research is so valuable to practice. It's, I can't speak highly enough about understanding research.
Yeah, let's transition then and talk about when will people actually start their clinical experience of when they're actually working with clients or patients in a practicum site.
Well, for our MFT program, it'll of course depend on which track you're on. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we have a 2-, 3-, and 4-year track. So if you're on the 2- and the 3-year track, you'll generally begin your practicum kind of in the latter part of your first year. Okay, there's certain classes that you need to have completed or be enrolled in order to kind of be eligible to begin practicum. The 2-year students will complete that in that final year, their practicum hours, again, 225 of those. Our 3-year students have kind of a unique option of either doing a slower paced practicum, where they're not having to do as intense to get it done in that 1 year. But they also have the unique opportunity to do potentially 2 different practicum sites. So they may do one in a county mental health setting, and then they may do one in a school-based setting, and get 2 very different practicum experiences out of that. Our 4-year track students will generally begin kind of the end of their 2nd, going into their 3rd year.
And what kind of sites are people usually at?
Well, we have over 50 to 60 different approved sites in San Diego, up through the Riverside County. So I say basically from everywhere from up to Hemet to the border and over to El Centro. We've got school settings, Christian-based settings, hospital settings, county mental health settings, inpatient and outpatient settings. So we've got a wide gamut of the types, whether they're children to elderly. We've got that option. We've got day-hour practicums versus weekend and nighttime hours. So we try to have a broad variety to meet the needs of all of our various applicants and students.
So for the undergraduate program, something that is semi-unique to Azusa is that we do offer a field experience class, which you may not get at a larger university. And basically within that, we've got people at all kinds of different settings, whether it's out working in the community, working in hospitals, working with homeless populations, working with children. It just runs far and wide because psychology is a broad place to work. So that's what's great about I think having a smaller school is that you are able to have a clinical experience that is going to put you ahead when you're looking to apply to a graduate school. That looks really good.
I'll just add the PsyD has the three years of clinical practicum, and like I said earlier, that third year of clinical practicum is focused in on psychological assessment, and you do all that before you go on and do a full-time internship that's external to APU, but you still haven't gotten your doctorate.
And the unique piece for the LPCC is that you're also getting a credential. So the credential requires 600 hours of field work in that master's degree. And of course, it would be in a school setting, has to be supervised by school personnel. And that is required also for the LPCC, it's required to have field work as well. So it would be based if the school sites are an approved clinical site by the Court of the Board of Behavioral Sciences.
And so for the MPH program, we have a requirement of an internship prior to graduation. And for the nursing, all of the programs have clinical expected. If you have, if you're in a program that is pre-licensure, that is really kind of determined by the California state. I actually have some handouts for you who are interested that there are different levels and hours of requirements. The only one is the PhD that does not have clinical requirements because that's a research degree.
Evelyn, can you speak to the social program?
Oh, sure. The MSW program requires 960 hours of clinical internship hours. And depending on the track, similar to what Amy was saying, if a student is in the 2-year full-time program, they immediately start their internship the first year and continue their second-year internship. If someone is in the 3 or 4-year track, the first year is usually just coursework, and then you start your internship the second and third year. And the internship sites are very similar to what you described: schools, hospitals, community-based agencies, as well as county mental health departments.
And for field experience, we require 100 hours. So you're going to get a good chunk of experience, but it's also not going to be as rigorous as a graduate program would be. And so, yeah, I think that it's something, again, that is unique, and you usually will take that with around when you're about to complete the program.
And it looks good on those master and doctoral applications, all that field experience.
Yes. So let's get into what a lot of people want to know about, and that's licensing. So basically, what I first want to talk about with licensing that was a hard lesson for me to learn is that there are 2 boards with which we work. Well, I'm sorry, I excluded nursing, but as far as those of us on this side of the table, there's two boards we're working with, and that is the Board of Behavioral Sciences and then the Board of Psychology. So the Board of Psychology is within itself just for those with doctorates of psychology. Everyone else is under the Board of Behavioral Sciences. And people ask me, well, are those hours that you get transferable? No, they are not. You cannot use Board of Behavioral Science hours with your MFT and then transfer them over to Board of Psych. That's not possible. So that's a big question that I get, and something that I wish that I would have known, just because it was a bit surprising when I went in. But when we talk about licensure, we're going to talk about the state of California in particular, because every state has different licensure requirements, and so we're going to stick to California requirements. But basically, the first question is, where do I register for this, and what do I need to submit?
Oh, go, sorry, go ahead.
I think for social work, MFT is probably pretty similar, but it is through, and it's changing right now. There's now online processes, which is making it a lot easier and more streamlined. But it is through the Board of Behavioral Science. For social work, it is a little bit different in that the internship hours that you do while in school don't count towards your clinical licensure. So basically all 3,200 hours have to start once you graduate. So you can't count the internship hours in graduate school. But it is all through the board, so there is a roadmap of, it takes at least 2 years to complete. There's 10, and part of the reason why is that you're gonna collect all these different types of hours. You're gonna get direct clinical hours, you're gonna do some of your research or case management hours. There's these categories of hours that you'll complete. But you can only collect 10 clinical face-to-face therapy hours per 1 hour of supervision. So that really is kind of the thing that keeps the timeline in place. But yeah, it's another great experience, because I think you go from learning about a bunch of theories in school and getting all this information thrown your way, and then it's nice to start to practice in the field, but have that really close support from a supervisor who's really checking in with you. You can ask those questions, really help hone your clinical practice. So it's a good experience. I don't think it's anything that you should dread. Maybe the social workers that I'm supervising now might dread.
So in terms of the MFT process, you will actually take your law and ethics exam very soon after graduating. You get what's called you become a registered intern or associate, and they like you to take that law and ethics exam within the first year. We recommend to our students to take it right away, because having just finished their comp exams, right, at the completion of their master's program, it's usually pretty fresh up there, so it's good to get that out of the way, and you've got all your study materials ready to go. At the completion of your 3,000 hours, again, we require the 225 direct client hours. So that's me working directly with a client. You'll have more hours than that, because you'll have, writing your notes and case management, your individual and group supervision. But we require the 225 direct client contact hours. Those will go towards the 3,000 total. Okay, the BBS will allow you as a pre-licensed student to have up to 750 direct client contact hours. So you can do more than the 225, but you need a minimum of that to graduate from our program. Again, at the completion of those hours, you'll take that second licensing exam, the clinical exam, or the vignette-based exam, and you should be good to go. We also, as part of our MFT program, offer the LPCC track as well. And with that, we only require one additional course. It's an online course that you can take. It's offered at every semester. And so that you can weave in at any point. And the hours that you count in your practicum will also count the 225 for the LPCC hours. Now, once you graduate, it's kind of like social work. The LPCC board, and I'll let Paul explain a little bit more too, they won't allow you to count the hours pre-masters. So you can only begin counting them post-masters. But for students that are going for both the MFT and the LPCC, once they graduate with the masters, for every one MFT hour, they can, we call it double dip, and get the 1 hour of LPCC. So in effect, you're riding kind of the same path once you graduate. You'll finish up the MFT hours a little bit sooner because obviously you can count some of those hours, your practicum hours, prior to graduating, whereas the LPCC is only post.
And Dr. Vadney, a lot of people want to know, because schools more and more are doing this, what is the benefit of dual licensure?
Well, that's a great question. Number one, I mean, the first thing I think of is marketability, right? Anything you can do above and beyond is a little thing you carry in your briefcase that markets yourself, and it's just another tool to bring your income levels up. So any additional training you can get, specialized training, potential for 2 licenses, your income potential will obviously go up. One unique thing about the MFT program is LPC students, and Paul, I'm sure you'll probably touch on this, they cannot necessarily do couples and family counseling until they have specialized training in it. So that is one thing that our program, obviously we're very intensively focused on couples and families. So we are able to kind of allow for that, but we have at times had the LPC students that do want to pursue the ability to do couples and children take some of our couples and family therapy classes here, so then that they have that background and that training to be able to kind of specialize in those areas as well.
That's an important piece for the LPCC because when it comes to the 3,000 hours post-master's degree, it's so similar to MFT requirements. With the important distinction is that when you graduate with a master's degree in MFT, you walk out the door ready at meeting the education requirements to meet with couples and families and individuals, but couples and families. That's unique to the MFT. That's embedded in the name. LPCC is not automatic. LPCC is geared towards individual counseling. By law, it does allow you to still do couples and family, but you need to make sure you add that in your coursework in your master's degree, a couples counseling class and a family counseling class. It's not automatic, and you want to make sure that if you're going the LPCC tracks alone and not the MFT, that you want to do couples and families, even maybe someday down the road, you have to have it embedded in your master's degree on your official transcripts. And then you can go on. You need to make sure when you're doing those 3,000 hours that somewhere in there 500 hours are supervised families or couples. That's an important distinction as well. It's not just the master's classes on your official transcripts, but you have to show in your 3,000 hours, like MFTs, that you had couples and families as well.
The only thing that I would add, I mean, we already talked about 5 years, last year's pre-doctoral internship, about a year of postdoctoral fellowship. That's what allows you to become to sit for licensure in the state of California. The only thing I'll add is that with a license of clinical psychology, a license of psychology, you don't limit yourself to saying I work with children or families or couples or adults or GERA or this. Once you're licensed, you can hang up your shingle, so to speak, with any of those, because obviously it's a doctoral program with a lot of courses, including courses in marriage and family and child and gerontology and trauma and all these different sort of areas where it's really in your clinical practicum that you get an opportunity to specialize. So for instance, we've got a lot of students right now who are interested in working at university counseling centers. So being the psychologist at the university, working in maybe a health center, so it could be on the counseling side, it could be on the counseling side plus sort of the what we called at APU a long time, the Learning Enrichment Center, so working with students who have identifiable disabilities, et cetera. So they would take some coursework in that, they would do practicum in that, they would match for internship, perhaps at a university counseling center, and that's the trajectory that then they get licensed with a general licensed psychologist, but then they go back and work in that area.
And Dr. Gerges, a lot of people also ask, why get a PhD or a PsyD when I can practice using, you know, a master's degree? So what is it that psychologists can do that others cannot?
It's a great question, and it's about breadth and scope. It's an opportunity to specialize. If you're doing 3 years of clinical practicum, you are having that additional clinical experience in the area. Of course, there's the area of psychological assessment, so getting to do all those evaluations like we talked about, whether those are with children or adults or gerontology, inpatient, outpatient settings. So the assessment is a big component of it. And then the opportunity to teach at whatever level you want to, right? Once you have your doctorate, you can teach undergrad or master's. With your master's, you can also teach undergrad and master's, but with my PsyD, I'm the director of the PsyD program now at APU. So it really provides you as many opportunities as you want. There are still, and here's where I'm a little bit weird, so forgive me. Being at Children's Hospital, I worked alongside LMFTs and LCSWs who did the exact same job I did clinically, right? And so that isn't what distinguished us, just aside from the testing piece of it. But so the distinction didn't come in the clinical work we did, but the distinction did come, of course, in salary, which is unfortunate, right? I mean, if we're all doing the same work, I think we should all get paid the same. But the opportunities that presented themselves, there were leadership opportunities that presented themselves to me with the doctorate that I was happy to, to pursue. Those are things that that really do come with the doctorate.
Dr. Dodd, Katera, what about you?
Yeah, I was just going to add one little piece of it. With the LPCC licensing, it had been mentioned earlier, anytime you have an opportunity to add other certifications, other licenses, obviously take full advantage of every opportunity that's right there in front of you. I know for the LPCC license, the board that writes the license for the LPCC is the National Board for Certified Counselors, NBCC. So when you sit for the exam in the state of California, yes, it's a state of California issued license, but they use the national exam for certified counselors. What's important to know about that is that because it's attached to this National Board of Certified Counselors, it opens the door for other opportunities to get national certifications. Like for me, I found out in the process with just a few more exams and a few paperwork filing and some fees to pay, I was able to get a national certified counselor and also a clinical certified mental health counselor. Now, have they ever panned out to like say, hey, you have that, I want you? I don't know if that's true. However, you never know. And it opens doors that you may not even realize because somebody sees your resume or something. Any opportunity to pursue additional certifications, pursue it, absolutely. It's worth the investment and the time. But additionally with that, because it's a national license, most states use that version of that national exam. So if you ever want to flee California and take that license to another state, you would just look at that state's LPCC or LPC requirements and say, is it the same exam, the same national exam that I took in California? And if not, then what do I need to do different? Maybe it's a law and ethics exam for that state or paperwork only or a fee. So that's an important distinction too, depending on the license you want to pursue.
Okay, so I'm talking about two different fields. So if you get a master's in public health, you can get certified in public health, but it's not a licensure. There's a national exam you can take, not everybody takes it. That's public health, but you can still go into mental health if you get your MPH and you have a focus throughout your program, in your internship, and whatever your capstone is, you can actually establish yourself in mental health and then let's say go to work for the public public health department or one of the agencies. So that's one way to do it, through public health. When you talk about nursing, it's very, it's very strict with how you get the license. You actually have to graduate from a approved nursing program, it has to be accredited. The school has to send your credentials and a letter of fitness, and that you're ready to take the licensure exam. So you're doing your clinical as an undergraduate in all of the specialty areas, meaning pediatrics and psych and OB. There's specific areas prior to you taking your licensure exam. Once you have that, you are considered a registered nurse. So your clinical is coming quite a bit before. It's very prescribed. When you take a didactic class, you actually have to take a clinical with that. It's very, very tied to the California Board of Registered Nursing. With that said, it is a national exam. So everybody across the country takes the same exam, but each state, if you moved, you still have to, like if you moved to Arizona after passing the California board, there's, reciprocity. You apply for it, you have to do some paperwork and pay a fee. They all make money out of it. But you don't have to take, another registered nursing exam. The nurse practitioner, if you want to be a psychiatric, want that particular type of nursing, there are also requirements. You have to have a master's degree. You have to have, there's specific requirements that I actually have print out here from the California Board of Registered Nursing. And the same thing with public health. If you have public health in nursing after your name, there are specific requirements for that. As an NP, you take a national certification, but you're actually registered with the California. Nothing is simple. Just put it that way. But I guess we all kind of love to hate some of these bureaus, but their purpose is to protect the public, and it's an underlying safety issue. So that's a good thing.
I think one thing we can all attest to is keeping good records, being very organized and fastidious with all of those pieces, because it will come in and serve you very, very readily.
So for the sake of time, we'll get to the question that anyone who completes a program wants to know. What is the licensing exam like, and how long should I take to study for it, and would you recommend doing a program or not?
So for social work, I want to point out the fact that you don't have to be licensed to be a social worker. You only have to be licensed if you're going to go into clinical practice and be a therapist. So there are a lot of fantastic social workers who don't have any interest and actually think that pursuing licensure as a clinician is kind of an abomination to the field in general. So if you are a social worker who decides to get licensed, you can work, be gainfully employed as a non-licensed social worker. There's a lot of jobs out there. I think that's what's unique about social work. I don't know a lot of jobs that might be available for family therapists who aren't licensed or working on licensure. So in that sense, it has a lot of diversity. If you decide to go for the license, then the exams I think are pretty similar between social worker and family therapists. There is a law and ethics exam that's done first, and then after that law and ethics exam is a clinical exam. As far as do I recommend paying for a program to study with, I think it really, each person should take good inventory of what your strengths are. If you work well with a program, then do that. I think for me, the best investment is being picky about the supervisor, the clinical supervisor that you decide to work with. I think you learn the most there, so don't just pick someone who's convenient, but someone who you really feel like you can build a strong alliance with and glean as much information from as possible. That'll help you.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that a little bit is take every opportunity you can where you're able to have good training and supervision. Do things that you are scared to do do things that challenge you, do things that you may not necessarily think you'll ever work with. Because I've had students that, I don't want to work with kids, no way. And then they end up doing it and they go, oh my gosh, I love this. I am so glad I had this opportunity. So you never know what is going to light you up and give you that spark. And that being said, there may be supervisors that you have that you don't always love, but you can still learn something from them. And so just take every opportunity as a place where you can learn and be open to learning, whether or not it's the greatest fit or not. You can still learn something useful and beneficial from that. In terms of the licensing exam, I do recommend that you do some kind of a study program, whether that's an online one, there's face-to-face seminars. And the reason is these licensing exams, you're going to come out of our MFT program knowing the content of what you need to know to do well on the exam. But the exam is sometimes meant to be tricky. And it isn't like a test where A is the correct answer and B, C, and D are completely incorrect. These exams are meant that there are questions that maybe 3 answers have correct components in it. And I think the testing site or company can help you understand what it is that the question's looking for and how to break it down to answer it in a way that they're going to want you to.
They love to say in those, pick the answer that is most correct.
That is most correct, right. And so I find that those testing sites and centers will help you to be able to understand that part of the exam. So again, it's not so much the content. You're going to come out of any Azusa program, I think, fairly competent in what you know. It's just how you're going to take that test, and they have studied and they have prep tests, and I find that the more of those that you take, the more you start to learn what it is that they're looking for and the best practice you can have. That said, I did 3,000 MFT hours, 3,000 psychology hours, took 4 licensing exams. And of those, I will say I did not pass my first clinical psych test, the EPPP. I wasn't strong in the data analysis and statistics part. And quite frankly, I just gotten married. I was kind of in la la land, so I didn't buckle down and study as hard as I should have. The next time I took it, I passed. End of story. So I find that the more you put into it, obviously the better results that you're going to have.
How much time do they give you for the exam?
Oh, I think they're 2.5 hours each. Don't quote me on it. It's been a while, but I think it's about.
I do have to say, A, it's a racket, and B, there is social bias on these tests. I mean, these tests aren't, an equal playing field for everybody, and yet there has to be some sort of the old school way they did it in psychology was an oral, was you go before a panel and you show your chops there, and then they say whether or not you get a license or not. Obviously, with the number of candidates across these fields, that can't happen anymore, but it is, they're licensing exams, of course, to become a licensed psychologist, and it's a little bit of an unfair gatekeeper in my opinion.
Yeah, and part of what makes it difficult, especially for the doctoral portion of taking the EPPP, which is the clinical part, is it is a 4-hour-long test, and so you fatigue. You get tired of sitting for 4 hours trying to go through these very intense questions, and you are nervous, you are anxious. So I would highly recommend investing in practice tests so that you can practice not only what type of questions are going to be asked, but sitting for that long, because you can get up if you would like to during the test, but the clock keeps running. So you also have to make sure that you show them that there's nothing in your pockets and pat yourself down and take your glasses off to make sure there's nothing in there. And the clock is running while all this is happening. So it's also one of those things of how do I strategically do this without the fatiguing. That being said too, with both exams, there's a huge price difference of the MFT exam being around $100, $200, where because you're working with a lot of people under that, social work, LPCC, MFT. So clinical psych is much more expensive, and something I wish I would have known prior to going in is that the EPPP exam is around $700. So that's something just to be mindful of I need to save money for the EPPP, and then I believe that the other exam is around, not as much, but I want to say around $200 for the law and ethics. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. So I would absolutely invest in a study.
It's an investment.
Yeah, it's in a study type of program and study at least 6 months prior to taking the doctoral exam for EPPP.
And if you have friends or colleagues that are generous enough to share their study materials with you, make sure it's current, because especially with the legal and ethical exam, the laws and the regulations change. And if you have 5, 6-year-old materials, you may be studying stuff that is no longer valid. So just keep that in mind.
That's an important distinction. Yes, I do believe it's worth investing in workshops, practice exams, a cohort of peers that you can meet with on a regular basis. You can do flashcards. You can be just kind of chew in all of these material. But notes from the trenches, having gone through it myself many times, things that I've learned that I think I would have found a greater value walking into that exam. It is 4 hours. Longevity is key. Sustaining yourself through that time is key. So taking practice exams and making yourself stick through it for 4 hours, practicing that. Don't underestimate the importance of a good supervisor. Again, I go back and I think about my clinical days in my master's, and sitting before somebody under supervision. And I had one supervisor's individual one-on-one and one supervisor was group, and they were so different from each other in the way that they supervised us. What I found is the one who was actually on the BBS oral boards at the time, back in the day, she was such a more polished supervisor because the very things that we talked about and presented in the room were from the framework of this exam. Because again, you know the material coming from a master's degree, you know the content. You're coming fresh out of a master's degree. Now, what do I do with it to pass a silly exam? But it's a requirement. You gotta turn the key to make sure it opens the door. So you gotta go through the motions, and a good supervisor makes all the difference, especially when they're familiar with the most recent exam.
And when the exam matters, unfortunately, is when people do ethical violations and the board comes in and either puts the person on some kind of disciplinary action or takes away their license. So I actually think licensure is very important.
It is important.
And yet the process by which I'll get off my soapbox, but the process by which we administer licensing are.
The good news is that once you pass, you don't have to take it again. You do have to do CEUs, which are usually done every 2 years to kind of keep you up to date on changes and to keep you current in your thinking. It's just not something you'll have to necessarily ever take again. So that's one nice thing.
Speaking about I'll just speak about the RN licensure exam because there's different requirements for other fields, but I have found that students say it is helpful to take a course prior to it. One thing I've noticed is sometimes very smart students don't always do the best on tests. There's test anxiety. And so one of the things that I had suggested to the undergraduate students, I didn't teach undergraduates here at APU, but in my previous program was throughout their entire program, if they can just buy, a book that has practice questions, because some of the anxiety comes from you're just not familiar with answering the questions in that particular way. And then if you add, and just, sit around with a group of people and have a cup of coffee and just talk to each other about it. It helps you with your current studies. It helps you diminish, maybe a lack of familiarity with that kind of a question. And then, like I said, if you take some, just look at the price for what you're doing for some of these prep courses. There's a variance in how much they cost, but anything that kind of decreases your anxiety, increases your confidence, it actually, you're able to demonstrate what you know, and that's really what you want to do.
We have a partnership in the MFT program with one of the major testing sites that oversees the Grossman and the AATBS. So we're able to hook our students up with that testing site to get reduced fees on some of those exams. So instead of it $250, it's, $110. So it's not, it doesn't reduce all of it, but it does help bring the cost down. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And the other thing is never underestimate the importance of a good night's sleep before one of those exams, eating a good breakfast, not cramming till 3 in the morning the night before. Really kind of going very mentally prepared and physically well rested.
Well, I want to thank everyone who is attending online, who is attending in person, and our panel. This has been wonderful information. If you would like more information, you can visit apu.edu. We have campuses. Our main campus is in Azusa, California. We also have an Inland Empire campus, Monrovia, High Desert, Orange County, San Diego, and Murrieta. So definitely check that out online. And for those of you who are here with us, we will be having our raffle next for our swag. And we will also be available until 8:30, where we're going to have breakout rooms where you're able to speak to the member of the panel that if you have extra questions. Also, we did make fact sheets that we will share for those of you who are joining online. We will upload those later on and let you know where they're at, but that provide some of the answers that we may not have gotten to, such as who can supervise me, things that are also important that you might want to know. But again, thank you for joining us. And so now we will move to our raffle. Andre, if you would like to go ahead and take charge of that.
You still have your hat over there? You still have your hat? All right, let's pass that hat up. Oh, it wasn't on camera. It wasn't on camera, so it didn't happen. So it didn't happen. All right, everybody have their raffle? Yeah? So I'm gonna mix them up here. I'm not gonna pick it because I don't want you guys getting mad at me. So I'm gonna have Dr. Hoshiko, who put all of this together, pick this.